just be the evolution of the sport. I mean, every now and again, you get these coaches that roll through that you just want to go, gosh, just get with the time, guy. If your coach is teaching your 6-year-old a headlock before anything, there's a problem. Look, we're going to take the 1 or the 16. You decide. Welcome to the show. We're live with the Roundtable Podcast. Today, we've got Rosehill's assistant coach, Freestyle and Greco director for the state of Kansas, James Bilby. Thank you for coming on, man. I sure appreciate it. I'll let you give yourself a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll get rolling.
Hey, Coach, I appreciate you having me on. So my name's James Bilby. I'm kind of a gypsy when I grew up. Kind of grew up a little bit everywhere. My dad worked for the Boeing company for about 40 years of his life, and ended up here in Kansas in 2012. I moved from the state of Florida. The Air Force brought me here, and I've been here for going on 13 years. And I coach over at Rosehill High, before that Derby High, and coached at a lot of different high schools across the country with my military travels from Virginia to Nevada, Florida, etc. Dodd School over in Korea. And then I run the South Central Punisher Wrestling Club, help with the Kansas Wrestling Club, which is a conglomeration of a couple different high schools around this area. And I currently serve on our executive board as our international styles director.
Yeah, man, you do a lot of stuff. There's no doubt about that. You're a man of many titles for sure. So you talked about your time in the military. How many years were you in?
Yeah, 25 and a half years. So I seem young, I look young, but I think if they dissected me, I think I'd probably look like an 85-year-old World War II vet. But yeah, I spent about 1,800 days overseas, Iraq multiple times, Afghanistan, jungles of Africa. I've been everywhere except Antarctica. So if the penguins are throwing down, I'm ready to fight.
Right.
Might be hard.
So if anybody knows anything about the military, it's definitely going to be you. With all the experiences you have and whatnot, and there's been a couple of guys that I've listened to podcasts and heard them talk, on some clips and things like that. Guys like Jocko and Tim
Yeah.
Kennedy and some of those guys, and a couple of different ones. They've all said, the guys that seem to do the best in the military aspect is guys that grew up wrestling. And I don't know what your opinion on that is, but
I think it's spot on. And both those guys are warriors. Love them both. Obviously, Jocko is a former SEAL, and Tim's a Green Beret, and so obviously we're UFC fighter as well. But it's true. I mean, when you look at like Bud selection, so like Jay Robinson, who was an important figure in my life, he used to bring the SEALs to his 28-day intensive camp, probably the last decade of it, and they would do the Trident Challenge. And what the statistics show is that only like 36% make it through Buds. Some guys will get recycled; they'll do it twice, right, for the SEAL part. But the wrestling percentage number, an ex-wrestler, 80% of them make it. So that alone tells me, the kind of grit and stuff like that. And I think there's obviously been times. I was telling a friend a couple nights ago. I was out for, I don't know, it seemed like 72 hours, probably 48, 72 hours. Didn't have a whole lot of water, didn't have a whole lot of food. And Otis Spunkenmeyer muffin is pretty much the only thing I grabbed before we left. And that's what you kind of ate on. That's what you kind of dissected on. So, being in, bad situations, lack of sleep, lack of food, right? Sometimes airdrop, a convoyed in, what have you. It really set my mindset, I guess you would say, made me mentally tough to kind of withstand some of that stuff. And you'd be in those situations and you would think back to being in a hot wrestling room and how bad that was. And so it gives you a great appreciation for when you get in some of those situations. But I attribute a lot of my success, at least as a military professional, as a officer, commander, what have you, based on my wrestling pedigree. I think a lot of us do.
Right. Yeah, and not to say that the TV shows or anything like that are anything near what you guys experience, but this TV show that I really like watching, it's called SEAL Team. They've got this quote that constantly comes up through the show that I've heard a couple different guys say, that if there's anything that's pretty spot on is is this saying that they come up with, and he's constantly talking about ignore and override, is what he says. Something happens that they don't like or whatever, or they're having problems with something. It's just constantly ignore and override. And I think in the wrestling community, that's something that we may not say to our kids, but it's
Right.
something that is kind of underhandedly said. You come up with a loss or something happens out of your control or whatever. It's just ignore and override. You're 8 pounds over 2 days before. Well, it sucks, but ignore and override, get it done. And I think that's why we have so much success after wrestling with any career that we go into. Typically, whether that's
Yeah.
business or finance, military, it's just because you just keep pushing along and nothing can help you out, and I will say, there's kind of a downside to that too, emotionally and mentally, there's a lot of guys that come out and have a hard time connecting with their kids and spouses and things like that, because of that mentality where it's, females a lot of the times I think they want to get into that inner emotional type deal, and us guys
Right.
are going, yeah, we don't do that here, you know.
Well, it's really true. I mean, one of the best analogies that I like, and I use it quite often, is tough times don't last, but tough people do. And I really believe that. So like when you're in the face of adversity, right, and you tell kids or your coworkers, what have you, to be resilient, like it all comes back to mental toughness, right? And and kind of trying to put that into perspective. I think when we look at like the things that we struggle with as like Americans, right? In the bigger grand scheme of things, having been to almost 70 countries, it's pretty minuscule, to be honest with you. Um, when you look at like lack of resources, lack of clean water, right? Places like Afghanistan where women couldn't go to school, right? And so when you look at all those things, you put it in perspective. Is that 8 pound weight loss or weight loss really gonna, make or break me? Yeah, sure. At that moment, like, yeah, it stinks, right? And it sucks, but you got to figure out how to get through it, right? And it's just you just got to put that in perspective. And I think as a coach, like those are the things that the good ones do, right? And try to give them those lessons because like our job is to make them better men or women than we were, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
So
I'm glad you said that, that part about mental toughness, because I think that's something that is really big in my room, and what I try to do with a lot of kids is, you can teach them whatever it is you want. You can show them whatever technique, you can do anything, but where you're going to see the biggest changes in performance is just mental toughness. I mean, you and I
yeah,
both know we've seen so many kids that are extremely, extremely talented, but the minute that something doesn't go their way, they blow up and then all that's out the window, So the minute that you can get that mental toughness mode to kind of click and they go over it and they get it, that's where I see the biggest jumps, where they don't let things, mess with them emotionally. And
and I like in wrestling and just not even in wrestling, but in all sports. I mean, we're starting to see that emphasis on like the sports psychology piece, rather it's, wrestling mental mindset, what have you. Um, because each of us and even them as kids have a breaking point, right? And so like for me, like personally, we will kind of just, compartmentalize it and then store it away, right? And at some point it's going to start to fall down, right? And so simple things is like, doing a buddy check, like, hey man, how you doing? And like I think sometimes that gets lost on checking in on your teammates, right? Checking in on your battle buddies, if you want to call it that, people within our families and just saying, hey man, like, how you doing? You okay? And just taking that time from a relationship standpoint and asking the tough questions, right? Because like you see like the epidemic of like suicide and some of the stuff, we see drugs, we know drugs are in the school and stuff like that. And so those type of things, if you build the right environment and the right culture, um, those are very, I think, instrumental pieces and lessons that will carry those guys and gals on for the rest of their life. And just being good human beings and
right,
just saying, hey. But I know, like with me, like personally, like with all this, gunfights, bad places I've been in, cartel guys chase me around, what have you. And I know, like, when I went through my divorce, dude, it was tough, man. Like, it shook me at my core, and it was tough. And I really had to work through some things mentally that I had probably neglected for a long time, or didn't realize, because of, like, I'll be fine, or hey, whatever. And it just, I think, just a multitude of, that being in that situation, and then all the other stuff in my background, it just kind of multiplied.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. So, we said earlier, you're a man of many faces. So this podcast, I'm gonna do something that I haven't got to do yet because I haven't had somebody quite like you on. I'm gonna
Let's
I'm
get
gonna start off this podcast with you being the freestyle and Greco director for the state, and having a state board position. And then, once we kind of get through that, we're going to jump into you as a coach because, like you say, you're freestyle and Greco director, you're the president and coach of the Punishers, you're the assistant coach at Rosehill. So we're gonna kind of mix this up a little bit. So, um, there's kind of some divide throughout the state right now. I think everybody sees it, everybody agrees. There's kind of uh, a little bit of a battle, and I don't want to say a power struggle. That's not what it is. It's more of just, I think, a quarter to half of the state is wanting some things done, and a quarter and half of the state doesn't want things, other things done. Um, so there's kind of been this big D2 versus D1 battle over the last couple of years, and I can tell you just from the time that I've spent in Kansas, which has been, you know, 20 plus years now wrestling. Seemed like D1 for the longest time was kind of the powerhouse, and that's slowly faded over the last 5-10 years, and now D2 is picking up, and so, would you speak to that on why that is, and the things that D2 is doing that's the reason, you guys are are moving up, and there's people that can argue it, but
right.
realistically, when we go to things like district duels and different things like that, when the D2 teams come in and just walk all over everybody, that's a pretty easy, you know, sign there that, hey, this is the new powerhouse here. So
Yeah. So I think some of the things that come to mind, like, and they're kind of two totally different kind of situations, right? Like, in Johnson County, you got a lot more, obviously, wealth and resources, right? And it's just a larger population base, right? So with that, you're going to have probably a preponderance of maybe more coaches that might be available, et cetera. The one thing that I do really like that they're doing right now is that they've mended pretty much all the fences up there, where KCTC is kind of the place for those guys to go and train. So whatever high school single they wear during the high school season, they've kind of put that to the side. Now, the integration level in District 2 is also kind of the same thing, where we've got guys working together, different coaches and programs that hadn't worked together very well in the past because of different maybe agendas, or maybe they were both 5A or 6A or 4A, what have you. But we have really done a really good job on herding the cats. And so when I see that, I see like the trickle on effects, like what's going on in other parts of the state, right? Like you see that now happening in Salina, right? Where you're getting the right people under the same composer and the same sheet of music starting to come together and say, hey, we're only going to get better if we work together, right? And so, and you're seeing that out in the southwestern part of the state, with you and Jesse working together, right? And you're seeing that up in the northwestern part of the state, a little bit more uh, um, distant logistical issues, right, between like Hayes and say Hoxie, but you got two really strong hotbeds with what they're doing up there. And then in southeast Kansas, same thing too. Those guys are starting to merge forces and starting to work together better as well. So the good news is, I think we're all working better together. I just think that we have a different view of what the world looks like, right? So like the one that comes up a lot is like, we need to send maybe just one team to the duels, and then maybe get very specific on style, right? Like, we're going to send an all Greco team, or we're going to send this an all freestyle team, or maybe we're only going to take a couple alternates. We don't want to take them all. The issue is, though, that I don't think many understand is that all of those things are subsidized through our operating budget that covers, from the state. So that's a pot of money that's coming from 13,000 different members, right? And so when you look at like the different dual teams, we just had our budget meeting last night, ironically. Um, Junior duels is like 13 to 14,000 bucks. That's what our state association throws at that, right? And um, we would like to see more kids get sponsored, right? I think, post COVID, there was a lot of people that were hit hard. I think I just had this conversation at cross country meet. I think with the election coming up next year, by spring, I would say something's going to get thrown at us. And I think it's going to be economic this time. We've already seen the pandemic card. We've seen some of the other cards burning the cities down, what have you. But I really believe it's going to be economic, and I think it's going to be housing. I think the market is going to burst, and it's probably going to happen then. And so I think as student loans kick in, all these different social economic factors kick in, it's going to throw something, and it's going to impact the wrestling community, and really it's going to impact the parents who are the ones, not the clubs, that pay for kids to go to events. So, we have kids that come from different levels of wealth, and there's kids that don't, have a lot, right? And so the question was, well, we need a way to pay for these guys. Well, the state is paying towards it, right, already, but we need to do a better job, I think, on networking some, I wouldn't say like a guardian angel, if that makes sense, right? There are people, and we have very generous people in our state from all four corners that do that for kids. And of course, we keep that kind of secret and hip pocket because if not, people will take advantage of that, right? They might not be struggling; they just want to get their kids' stuff paid for. But that's a big piece, is that we're kind of, I wouldn't say financially constrained, but we're limited, right? So when we do that, we have to then have a qualifier. All of our national teams, even include, as Heartland Duels, there's a qualifying event, right? For Freestyle Greco, there is the state tournament, and that's how you get the support for these other events, right? And so there's some coaches that they get frustrated with that, and I understand their frustration with it too. Of course, I always say, I don't make the rules, but I will follow them, but we will fight back on things when we can. And then there's some things too, where you look at a state like Oklahoma, it costs their athletes $1,500 to $2,000 to go to Fargo. Our average athlete probably paid $800-900, duels, schoolboy duels. We only sent one team, it is what it is. We flew them out there to Pennsylvania. The parents had to pay the airline ticket. They were probably about $500. Now, we took care of them with food and lodging at they stayed at the Fairfield, so they were living good. Their team fees, all this stuff. But Oklahoma, it was $800. That doesn't include the gear. But like they sent a link out, and the families had to buy the gear outside of the singlet. So you kind of look like the Salvation Army, so to speak. You had guys probably in quarter zips and some guys in t-shirts, depending on how much money already had invested in that. But you talk to the Oklahoma guys, I mean, they're a little fired up when they know what kind of deal we got. But they're also a split state where you got OKWA and you got USA Wrestling, where at least we're unified. We have a very strong USA Wrestling presence. We're the third largest in the country, behind California and Illinois, which are huge states in comparison to us. But our state association does a lot for our kids. Something that came up in that budget talk last night with the executive board is we toss a lot of money at our probably top 5 to top 2% kids. Or if you want to call them elite, what about the other, 12,995 kids, or whatever that might be. And so we're exploring stuff to do kind of what I would describe as like a beat the streets. But it's not just beat the streets; it's also the rural communities too that we got to get into, right? So I look at a guy that you're familiar with, like Jacob Gonzalez. You look at like what Jacob's doing down there in Southwest Kansas. Went to a small town, Santana. How do you say it?
Satana.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Santana, right? And you look at what Jacob's done in 18 months. It's amazing, right? He's doing exactly what he's doing. So some of the things that we brainstormed, and this is not verbatim, but just to give you an example, maybe we're going to set aside a money to encourage, guys like you or me to go into some of these places that maybe had wrestling once or didn't, and give them grant funds to start up a program. So, you want to start like Wyandotte County. Their numbers are are really low in Wyandotte County, which is, just right next to Johnson, but the numbers are really low, but yet it's very urban populated. How do we get back in there? So what we kind of discussed was getting some, an individual or two from each district, maybe getting a task force, a committee together and brainstorm this. I believe we're going to send out a survey, is what we discussed, to get that survey out to all our wrestling members and saying, what are things that we can do, not just to grow wrestling, but to help all wrestlers, right? And we're going to set some funds aside to do that. So I'm kind of excited, and I think everybody on the board was excited because we really don't know what that end equation is, but we know what some of those variables are and where we're struggling. So, but I used Jacob as an example last night. I was like, look what this guy's done, and he did it on his own, and he's got probably 20 kids in there is what I see in the videos, and they're getting better, so it's pretty impressive. And so I compliment folks like that are out there doing those things, because that's really wrestling in its purest form.
Yeah, Jacob's doing some really good things out there. He's putting in the work and putting in the effort, and that's really a lot of it all it takes. Yes, it does take funds and it takes some knowledge, but a lot of it's effort. If you're gonna be willing to put in the effort, then you're gonna be able to get a lot done. And I think a lot of parents see that you're putting in that effort, and then they get on board with you. It was
Sure.
kind of a rebuild type deal for us. In Dodge, what, 8 years ago. Um, where we didn't really have a whole lot of club coaches that even really had wrestled much, and definitely not at an elite level. And, so when I came back and decided I was going to take that over, that was kind of what it was. It was, I got to put in as much effort as I can, and then the biggest thing was I got to get the parents on board, because if the parents aren't on board, you're not going to get anywhere with it. And after they kind of saw the effort and whatnot, then you slowly started to get more and more and more to buy in, and then we've kind of run with it and have done what we've done. I mean, having
I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think that's where some coaches in our state get it wrong at times. We're in the business of building relationships, right? And I think me and you are probably spot on this. Like when I start with a wrestler that's 4 or 5, 6 years old, like it's a lifetime friendship, right? So even after they get through middle school and they get through high school and they're off into college, like I call these guys, and check in on them. Like, hey man, how you doing? How's life? How's grades? Do you need something? Because for them, it's a transition in life where they go away from everything that they know, like their friends, their family, their teammates, and now you're putting them into a new situation where they might know one guy there. They maybe knew the coach that recruited them, right? Maybe that's it. But it's a lifetime relationship. And so I think where some coaches sometimes get it wrong is they'll communicate with the kid, right? Directly. The magical key to all that is exactly what you articulated, is it's the parents, because the parents are the ones that have to also have ultimate buy-in, because they're the ones that are paying the bills.
Yep.
Right. And so for me, like, yeah, the kid has to want to wrestle, and the kid has to want to go do these events, right, and make the weight and do those things, right? But if mom or dad doesn't have the money, little Freddie ain't gonna probably go, right? Depending on what kind of state the club's in or whatever. So the interworkings within the parents, it's key, and it's literally a relationship building. I mean, I know you've seen it as a kid with the kids that you coach, and they're competitors. I mean, we all grew up together as kind of like this family, and these relationships, they'll last forever. They really will, good, bad, or indifferent. They will last. They'll last a lifetime, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah, well, and I definitely think there's some things that we can do as a state besides just the tournaments that, like you say, we're catering to the top, 2% of kids,
right.
and I think a lot of that has to do with the funds. We're year in, year out, we're bringing in a lot more money than we're spending, and that's proven. You go to the state body meeting and look at it every year, so we could do some things, and everybody's going to have their opinion, but you could do some things like building facilities throughout the state that are, USAWKS built facilities that they're going to. This episode is brought to you by J3 Apparel in Garden City, Kansas. You ever go to the gym and just aren't comfortable? Workout clothes, especially in the wrestling room, are something that you can't just go and buy whatever it is that you feel like. You have to buy something that's built for wrestling. And J3 Apparel, they've got it there. You go into a Nike store, you go into an Adidas store, yeah, they've got some combat sports clothes, but they're super expensive and honestly not very comfortable. Go to J3 Apparel, they've got everything you need.
Yeah, so Clay, I mean, back to your question, your comment on the facility piece, like that's one thing that I mean, there's a couple of things that we're lacking within our state, right? So one, we don't have a D1 program right now, which hurts, right? Um, so we don't have, those kind of athletes, those kind of coaches here. Now we do got some great coaches, we do have great athletes. It's just there's another, level to that we don't have, right? And those kind of resources that come along with that. But a lot of our partner states, they do have brick and mortar facilities, and that is something as you talk to our parents, our coaches, our kids, is that we don't have a place that we would call home, right? And so in theory, we need a place like that. Like there's no reason not to have a place like that. We have the funds to do that. And I think it would be heavily utilized, one by our national teams. But outside of that, even you have all these other weeks during the summer, where that place could be rented out to, Dodge City out to your club, for 2 or 3 days. It can be rented out to my club or to, Jacob Gonzalez. We used him, Jesse. You just go around and that schedule is maintained. And so I think that place would be used a ton. And but that's what the people want. The people want a place to call home. We don't have a place to call home. We're not there yet. We're getting closer, I think. But the good news is we are going to get some new vans. So we're heading in the right direction with some of the stuff. So we're going to get 2 new vans. I was hoping to get 4 is what I was pushing for. Because I think that's the number we need. And then strategically place those throughout the state. But we're going to end up with 2 vans and which will help, for a lot of these different events.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that quite honestly, and I know people are going to give me some hate for this, but I think that has a lot to do with it's very apparent that there's an old guard and a new guard in the state of Kansas right now. And the old guard's been pushing back on the facility deal for a while, and it's kind of to a point now where it may be, hey, it's time for the old guard to step down and step aside so the new guard can all step in and take over, and I mean, honestly, I would like to see us do more of that. The van thing is good. I know a lot of that logistically, especially with vehicles, being an insurance professional, the liability part of that is probably why a lot of states don't do it, and I get that part of it. Especially for larger events and stuff like that, when you can hire village buses and stuff. I know it costs a lot, but and we saw that, with cadets. I mean, that bill for those buses this year for cadets was pretty outrageous. But at that point, you're essentially putting the liability on village buses and not USAWKS. And I understand that part of it, but there's just some certain things that you got to do. And, like I say, as an insurance professional, that's why insurance is there. Yes, it's going to cost you, but you also got to look at how much money we're bringing in every year. We've got to start doing some things with the funds. And if that means we're going to have to buy some big policies and some bigger general liability policies with some certain endorsements on it, so that way we don't have to worry about that stuff. That's just what we're going to have to do to grow.
No, I agree, but I think that's kind of where it starts is, that there's 3 things that I think that we could do better. And a lot of us, discuss this, on the national team staffs is one, we need facilities or a facility, right? And that's kind of an interesting one where I'll just say this, that we have a philanthropist in the Kansas City area who told me he would love to build one today in the Kansas City area, but he knows because of the optics with the D1, D2, all that stuff, that if it was built in Kansas City, it probably wouldn't get used a lot. The other districts would maybe shun it, right? Which I could see some of that, but I could also see, like, if that's where the cadet camp's going to be, like, we're going to be there, right? Like, we have to. So, but what he offered the state association, I think, was a killer deal. He said essentially, if you guys build one in the state, and I've had this mecked out in my mind for about a decade, and it would need to be somewhere off of 135 and I-70. Okay, and I'm talking in between McPherson and Salina. You put it there, it's centrally located off 2 major interstates that run through our state. So it's going to be easy to get to. I get some will still have to travel than others. That's what we're going to get into. But for different camps and sessions to do that, it doesn't matter, right? Like the parents will get the kids there, the coaches will get the kids there. But he said he would match us dollar for dollar if we built one. So we would get two facilities for the price of one. We're not going to get a better deal for that. We won't. But
No.
that's where I'm like banging my head against the wall because we all know that we need this, right? We need that. We needed vehicles, so we did get that addressed, which is awesome. I'm very thankful for our board to do that for us. But then the third one though too is California, Illinois, their national team coaches, like that is their profession, that is their job. And when Jesse Felke was at Legends of Gold a couple years back before he joined the Army to further on his Greco career, I kind of pitched some numbers at him on what that would cost. And at the time we was on the board, we had some individuals that were very intrigued by this, like Matt Treaster. But that's what these other states that are doing is that they have a national team coach. And Jesse told me flat out, we could probably get a former top 10 Greco guy who obviously has a freestyle background. We could get him for 40 to 50 grand a year to do nothing but that and run around and do clinics.
Yeah, no, and that would be, you know, those guys, out in Illinois in that area, you know, talking about financials like that, you look at 40, 50 grand and a lot of people go, well, gosh, that's not a whole lot of money. But realistically, that's quite a bit of dang money, just to be coaching. I mean, that's an entire pretty much teacher's salary for the most part. And all you're doing is coaching, and yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into it, but I mean, I wouldn't have any problem going, yeah, let's do that. Let's get some guys in here, especially if they're gonna pay you just to coach. It's a great thing. And then on top of that, if you're gonna do clinics and whatnot, you can't tell me that there's not one club in this state that would say no, we don't want somebody to come in at even just $10 a head. And
Well,
that's
and one of the guys that I got linked up with, I mean, I actually called him. I got his contact from a couple of mutual friends because I was like, we probably want a guy that's well diverse in all three styles, right? And the guy that they pitched, he's wrestling the worlds right now, is Joe Rao.
yep,
Joe Rao won Pan Am Golds in freestyle as well. Obviously he's been an Olympian, a couple time world team member. And I called him because he was up at Northwest. This is shortly after the COVID stuff, and that's why like Jimmy Kennedy and Andrew Howe, those guys left because they were forcing those guys to get that vaccine, and Joe was looking to do something different, and we started talking money just to see what that would look like, and could we even get a guy like Joe Rao into Kansas, and he's willing to do it.
yeah,
He was
oh yeah,
willing. So you get a name like that. That's what then legitimizes your RTC too, because he was a top 10 guy at some point in life. I mean, he's a current world team member, but you couldn't be affiliated with any high school, because we wouldn't want that optic. And so essentially, March through, end of July, we're busy with the Freco season, right? Well, then after that, he could then do clinics and camps because the state association is paying him. He could go out to a place like Russell, Kansas. He could go out to a place like Frontenac and put on a clinic at free of cost for our members. So he would be used, right? And then once the high school season kind of got going, that would be kind of his downtime where then he could be readjusting what is our plan, what is our schedule going to look like, and lining out all of our camps and all that other stuff. But
right,
I think that with those three things, the logistics, the building, it's also the paid coaching position to bring in somebody to make us better. Now, with that being said, too, the state got a lot better, this summer with Tyrone Lewis heading up to Baker University. A lot of people I think kind of know his background, but they don't. But I mean, he was an alternate on the 2008 Freestyle Olympic team. He was a four-time All-American at Oklahoma State, and when that announcement was made, I told our guys up in Fargo, I was like, I want to get him. I mean, he's great. He's going to help us get better if he's got the time to commit. We'd be crazy not trying to olive branch a guy like Coach Lewis into our programs.
yeah, no, I agree. And so talking about coaching, we kind of move into that side of it, where you have done a lot of impressive things as a coach, and not only as a coach but as a leader of a club too, where you moved into Rosehill and essentially started from scratch. I mean, where a lot of these clubs around here have been around since the 80s, 70s. You started from scratch in what, early two or like late 2000s?
Yeah, so I got here June of 2012. When I got here, literally like I was just like a novice coach, if you want to say. I was a dad. And we literally had about 20 to 26 kids in our program. We were 108th in the state. And no disregard or disrespect to those guys before me, and they did what they could, right? And but 108th out of 182 ain't much to be proud of in any numerical fashion, right? And but I really got lucky. I got lucky with a guy by the name of Tony Ponce, who was here. He was a part of a couple national championship teams at Labette Community College with Coach Renfro, and then he was an All-American as well up at Dana before they shut that program down, which then turned into Midlands. And then he did some GA time. And so he moved back home. So I was really lucky to have a guy that was about probably 24, 25 at the time, who's a super awesome technician. Tony's one of the most, he kind of reminds me of Nunez, of Jesse Nunez, to be honest with you. Just kind of, he's got that, kick back, chill kind of demeanor. But when it's time to fight, like it's time to fight. And he's got that in him too, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's time to get. And I think me being the good idea for, if you want to call it that, merging them with this guy that just got out of college, I was like, hey man, we need to start a Freestyle Greco club, because there really wasn't much in Wichita at that point. It was pretty much central Kansas, which was kind of fledgling at that point in time. And we just needed to keep these kids on the mat. Well, then we started like our first summer camp series, and people, I mean, they thought we were bonkers. Like, what are these guys doing? But we knew what the kids needed was they needed more time on the mat and they needed reps, right? Like the basic, 7 fundamental moves. And then it turned into preseason training, right? Like nobody was doing camps all summer long. Nobody was doing preseason. There wasn't much Freestyle Greco. And it kind of set the stage with some of these other guys that are on us now, because like Mays, they do an excellent job with a lot of that off-season stuff. Derby's trying to do some of that. Andover's kind of put their hand in some of that stuff too. But the unique thing with us is that we brought in kids from wherever, and it still exists that way today. Like, we don't care what you look like. If you have money, if you don't have money, we don't care what singlet you wear from November to February. We don't care about that. What we pride ourselves on is that if you want to get better, we really believe that we can help you. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty meager times, Clay, and that first group of kids, they're all juniors in high school now. The Johnny Lex and the Trenton Richlines and Adam Bilby, all those guys that are kind of our core contingent of juniors now, they were novice kids with us, and we're starting to reap those rewards. But it was a 10-year process to get to that, to get to where we've gotten. But we went literally from 108th to being the best in Kansas in 5 years. I don't think that's ever been done, and might be done. Maybe Nate Blevins is a guy that can pull it off. He's got a good thing going, obviously, over there with Triumph, and they're a couple years old. But I would like to see somebody go in 5 years to be the best, and not only that, be an outsider. I'm not from this. I didn't know anybody when I moved here. I didn't know. So when I say like the relationship piece is important, like it's so important. Like I am so blessed to have relationships with so many people across that state, and I'm talking like not like, hey, how you doing? Like meaningful relationships where these are people I communicate with constantly, because we help each other, right? And it's a network. And I've learned a lot from a lot of folks, and hopefully I've been, able to help them learn a couple things too. So.
Yeah. No, it's been extremely impressive, and what you guys have built, and your mausoleum church wrestling room, that Punisher facility is pretty sweet, and it's nice too, where a lot of the problems I feel like a lot of teams run into, I mean, I know we've run into it a couple times out here in Dodge, is if you don't have your own facility that's yours, the school districts sometimes kind of run when you can and can't practice, and they may have their no Wednesday practice rules, and you can't come in on the weekends. You go to a tournament on Saturday, and a lot of the times it's really beneficial to have just a technique session on Sunday to go over some of the things that happened the previous day, when it's still fresh, and so
Right.
having your own facility, that's definitely a game changer, as well.
I mean, and it is. I mean, and for us, like we do what I would call pay for play in Rosehill. So I've probably paid these guys over $20,000 in the 10, 12 years I've been here. It costs us $2,000 a year because we still have to rent space with those guys based on the how large our club is. And I'm thankful they'll at least rent it to us. But I bought this, like who takes out essentially $100,000 of their own money, and I'm not royalty. I mean, I'm a middle class normal dude, and I pretty much liquidated some 401ks and did some things that Dave Ramsey would probably cringe at financially to pull this off. But who buys a church? Like it's gonna be so hard for me to sell this thing. What I do, it's tough. But I just got tired of paying a bill for a wrestling room, and we wanted to do exactly what you said. Come in on a Sunday afternoon. Kid wants to come in and get an early morning workout before school. I don't want to keep having to ask. And so it's just easier to cut a key, tell the kid the rules or the parent the rules, and they can come and go as they want. And that's literally what it looks like in the summertime. Because all these college kids, even over the holidays, they all come back. I mean, kids like Bubba Wright, who's a caping guy, he'll come down in here. Lindsay boys are coming in, Tristan Wills, Crew Squires. I mean, you name it. They'll come in here and they'll get a workout. Aiden Campbell, back when he was wrestling at Little Rock. I mean, all these guys will come in here and get a workout. So that's the thing. Like, there's no agenda, there's no motive. Hey, if you want to work out and train, you want to get better. Like, I think we can help you.
Yeah.
And if we can't.
Yeah, and there's pros and cons to it for sure. I mean, I think the pros outweigh the cons, but you get the stupid stuff, like all the crazy allegations that go around, of kids living there and you guys recruiting and all that BS, and so, I know
Well,
that was kind of a serious thing last year, especially, you guys had a couple of kids that actually moved in, and then you were getting all sorts of accusations about, oh, well, he's housing them in the Punisher facility and this and that.
Well, it's funny because I don't know if I ever told you, but I definitely told Jaron Brown and Taken Lambite, both good dudes, right? And they had told me some of the stuff that they were hearing, like Julio was living in here, and Rhett Briggs was living in here, and Bronx Woods living in here. So I mean, it got to the point where I was pretty frustrated and pretty mad because anybody that knows, Bronx Wood has been a Punisher kid for a long time.
Yeah.
He lives 2 miles west of me on 63rd. Rhett Briggs has been a Punisher kid for probably 6 to 7 years, and so they were all clean, legit moves. When the Aguirres moved up, they had a lease. They lived here. And people can chastise those guys, and they can have their own opinions. I get it. The optic of the timeline was what it was, but you know what though? When you get out of a bad situation, the situation that they were in, and you're saying, hey, I'm going to go run a house in another state and it might cost me 10 grand. That's what's doing best for your kid. Okay. End of the day, that's what a parent's supposed to do. And it's not for guys like us to question if that was the right move or not. I'm not his parent, right? I'm not his mom or his dad. They are. They understood the financial hardship that might come with that. But at the end of the day, it worked out. And the weirdest thing too, like with that is he's a great kid. He was a 4.0 student. I mean, an excellent kid. And so, they're Kansas people. Yeah, they came from Oklahoma, but they're from Ulysses. I mean, Cesar Aguirre wrestled for Coach Prieto when he was at Ulysses. They're Kansas people. The mom is Alicia's from Garden City. And you have people just saying horrible things about these folks. And but at the end of the day, when you make a physical move like that, you can move anywhere. Why did they move to Rosehill? They moved to Rosehill because of the relationship. I had known them for 10 years. They had wrestled duels as we had traveled all over the country with those kids. And at the end of the day, relationships matter. And so those that were mad, I would say you need to work on making friends. Okay? Build impactful, meaning relationships. Or if you've got something to say, man, I'll be that guy. Come say it to me, right? Come say that to Coach Safe Right. And the problem is a lot of these guys, and they know who they are. I'm going to pull Coach Prime. We've kept receipts. We know who they are because it all circles back. They don't have one hair in their butt to come tell us. So I'd say man up.
Yeah. Well, and don't act like, Keisha is going to give anybody any favorites. If there was something that actually happened, Keisha is going to be on top of that tomorrow. And it would have been investigated and looked at, and they wouldn't have just gave you a slap on the wrist. They would have hammered you because that's Keisha. That's what they're going to do. That's how they've always been. That's how they always will be. And that's not saying
And
that
like
that's
the
the problem,
and,
but
one, that one bothered me too. I mean, great people. We had known them since, because they were from Mays and they were at Young Guns for a while. Mays and Goddard, right? And they were just done down there at Stillwater High. And they sold a $600,000 house on a golf course. When you sell a $600,000 house, you got a lot of skin in the game to me. And they moved. They moved in December. He was at Rosehill High from August, but there's people like, oh, this guy was recruited in. No, they sold a $600,000 house and bought a very nice home when they moved here. But people also forget that the world changed during COVID. Like me, like I work remote. I work from a laptop. Yep, I'm on a plane a lot, going to different places, doing the consulting thing. But the same thing too is that it isn't like 30 years ago, like our dads, like whatever town or career that they had, they were kind of fixated to that town. If they moved, your pops had to find a job somewhere else, or you weren't typically moving, right? In today's world where you're in this remote hybrid deal, you can choose wherever you want. And I think people forget this is America. If you're not happy somewhere and you don't like living there, or you feel that your kid has been slighted, then leave.
Yeah.
Do what's best for your kid, right? You don't have to embrace it. You don't have to just sit there. I mean, if I wasn't happy with my kids in Rose Hill, like I'd have a for sale sign in my yard tomorrow. Tomorrow. I wouldn't even hesitate
Right.
if it was, and I would probably move to the next best situation that would be best for my kids, socially, academically, and athletically.
Right.
You know,
Right. So, so we recently had your guys on. You kind of helped orchestrate that a little bit and get them all lined out, and it didn't dawn on me at the time, but it dawned on me afterward. Rewatching the podcast and whatnot, that they seemed a little bit upset and heated about some certain payola situations where you guys weren't seeing them and you guys were only getting into their tournaments, or only seeing them at tournaments at state, really.
right.
And there was some disgruntled bits about not being able to get into their tournament and them not coming down to you guys. So is there anything to that, or was that just kids being kids?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, we know those guys very well, the families, the kids. I mean, they have grown up wrestling those guys are, their whole life, and they're tough, right? They're tough dudes. But I think that it goes back to kind of the Acacia stuff. You can only have so many 2-day tournaments. You can't travel so far out. So logistics plays a lot of that into that as well. But at the end of the day, the kids want to wrestle other great kids, right? And so it's probably a rivalry in some aspect because they do go kind of back and forth. You know, Brock Johnson, beat Johnny Luck in the state finals. I watched Brock kind of get after Johnny at the Vegas Open. I mean, he took him down with a sweep, uh, put him in a cradle, back up, swept, put him in a cradle, and then pinned him. I'm like, holy cow! Like, we're never going to beat this guy again. I think Brock kind of owns Johnny at this point. Well, obviously, we re-wrestle it, at straight freestyle Greco, and Johnny beat him twice that day. Johnny, pinned him in, I think, in a Greco match, and then beat him like 12-8 or something, 12-7 in a freestyle match. And Bryson and Adam had their thing at the folk style tournament, and Caden Powell's another one, but they are good kids. They're good kids. They're tough dudes. We would like to see them more. We'd like to see Tonganoxie. I think Tonganoxie. I was talking to Joe Connect and Pale actually a little bit earlier today, and I told Joe, I was like, I think Tonganoxie is the most underrated 4A team because of Pankey. He was a state finalist at 215. All the top end 215 pounders in 4A are gone. And that's 20 some points that aren't there. And so they're going to be tough. I think it's kind of their last run. A lot of their guys graduate and phase out. But Paola, they're not going anywhere. They're going to be around for one. Much like us, we're going to be, tough for a number of years. And Andel's going to be tough. They're going to graduate quite a few guys, but they've got a, eighth grade class that, I think guys like me and or, talk to Garrett Patterson, they know, I follow the youth scene. They know that Andale group of kids that are eighth graders are going to be pretty tough, but they didn't get anybody in. We're like us. It's our freshman class might be just as talented as that junior class. I mean,
Yeah, well, and you've got a few hammers in your guys' eighth grade class also.
yeah, we do. We do. James and Thunder, yeah, they are probably at this rate the team most accomplished guys, which is scary to say that when you look at guys like Milan, Johnny, or you know Tristan Wills, Kate Lindsay. I mean, guys, well, there's been a bunch of them, right? Zarek. I mean, Zarek was a hammer. Um, but I'll say this because somebody asked me this couple weeks back. I think it was a Derby guy, and I looked at some Derby kids, and James and Thunder have won Kid State every year but once. James got hurt, I think, when he was bottom of 8 and under. He's won it every year. And he's got like 5 Triple Crown jackets to go along with it. Like I could go on less than 2 hands how many kids has beaten him since he has started wrestling in the state of Kansas. Straight up.
Yeah.
All those guys that have beaten him, he's beaten them more than they've beaten him. So those are the receipts on that. So, you know, but it's size, right? He's 104 pounds right now. He's a little bitty dude. He's grown a lot, but size will be a factor. But Thunder the same way. Thunder, he keeps growing and he keeps getting better. I mean, he got second at Kids Nationals and Greco's a national finalist, and then he got fourth in freestyle. And he won Kids State, I think, every year. The seventh grade year, so it's not this last season. The year before is what Snake did, and that was the Noah Wumpf now from Abilene beat him, and caught him in an inside cradle, kind of caught him by surprise, and then Lars has the kid from Virginia that moved in that a lot of people in the state probably still aren't really tracking that kid's talents.
Yeah, nobody. I don't think there's a whole lot of kids that know him, but I'm telling you right now, that kid is gonna be great. I'll have Dylan look up his name because I don't remember it.
Off
But
the
uh,
top of
but
my head, but Jeff Safright, Chris's brother's the one that tipped me off. Like, hey, this kid's moving to Salina. He's been our club. You know, he's tough, and he's not even 100% back yet. He's kind of still, not coming in the room regularly. And so for him to beat a kid like Thunder, who's won, I mean, he's won. I think he's won every tournament, big tournament that a kid can win, minus kids nationals,
right.
literally every tournament. Like he's won Tulsa numerous times, kickoff. He's won Winter Nationals. He's won it all, and um, so that's what's crazy is that with at least with my team, mine and Chris's team is we're not going away. Like this year we graduate one senior in the men's side, and that's Rhett Briggs. He's a two-time medalist. We're hoping to be a top three, maybe a state finalist, compete for state championship. But that whole group of guys comes back, and now you throw in, Thunder at probably 150 pounds, which it's going to be interesting wrestling grown men, you know, barely 15 years old. But I can tell you right now, I'm not betting against him because all he has done is exceed standards. I'm not going to bet against James. All he's done is win. How can you bet against him?
Yeah.
And people want to bet against him. I'll take those bets right now, and I can promise you they'll be the ones left at the end, just based off history. And so when you talk to people in the community, they're like, it doesn't matter, you win at 6 or 8 or whatever. It does, because it builds confidence, it builds expertise, it builds depth. We take kids all across the country, much like you guys, so that when they go into the 4A state tournament, 6A state tournament, it's not the biggest crowd they've ever seen. Now, is it still nerve wracking? Oh yeah, sure. Is that semifinal still kind of dicier than what it should be at times or closer? Sure. But what we try to do as coaches is try to get those kids exposed to every arena, rowdy, loud, big, what have you, hostile, so that when they're back in Kansas, it's just another tournament, man.
Yeah. Did you find his name, Dylan?
Roman Tuttle,
Roman Tuttle.
23-1. His only losses to Thunder Page and Freestyle or at Greco.
Yeah, so Thunder beat him in Greco, and then he beat Thunder in freestyle, if I remember. Because I missed the match. I didn't see it, but
Yeah. So no, I mean Thunder. He's a hammer. He's coming up there. And I think that's something else that I was kind of wanting to get into was rankings. And it seems like we get into preseason, and we get a lot of these rankings out, and I feel like in the past there's been a lot of bias, in some of these rankings, and obviously they iron themselves out throughout the season sometimes,
right.
but where you guys, you're not seeing Payola kids and whatnot till the state tournament, that really hurts, and I think we've done better about it, but I feel like in the past there's been a lot of bias, in the rankings, and I don't know how you feel about that, but that's kind of where my head's at with it.
I think there's some bias. I don't think we look at it full scope. Like, yeah, is folk style freestyle Greco? It's not. But if you beat a guy in freestyle, I'm going to factor that in, into it because there is a lot of translation, right? Now I get it. Now, how did the match end? Did I catch a guy in a knee pull to a sweep to a lace, and that was a match? Okay, maybe not. But I mean, if it goes the distance and stuff like that, like you have to factor that stuff in. But I don't think we see enough of each other, right? Like Hoxie, like we never seen Hoxie last year. I feel bad for Mays. Mays never saw Hoxie last year, but I can tell you this: we saw Mays a lot, and Mays was good, and I know Hoxie was good. But I can promise you, I believe Mays beats him in any tournament in that state. I'm telling you right now, like Mays would have beat those guys. So how were they number one all class and Mays wasn't? I I don't know. I don't know the logic behind it, but to me, it doesn't add up. I mean, we wanted to dual Hoxie. We wanted to dual Hoxie at Mays, and we talked to Coach Porsche. They had the Boyd tournament, didn't want to work out, but knowing Coach Patterson and those guys, they wanted to see it too. They wanted to see how tough these guys were. I'll give you insight on an event right now that um, Coach Wentz is trying to run, which I think is going to be really cool if we can get it going. Is he wants to run a quad at Fort Hayes, but the night before the Bob Smith. So he invited Hoxie, Mays, us, and then we had kind of some other teams they were looking at, and that was Garden City, Mill Valley, and Manhattan, which they got Ezekiel Witt now. He transferred in there. Manhattan's going to be pretty dang tough. But all those teams are tough, right? And so the intent was try to get a team from 1 through 3A, 4A, 5A, 6A. Tough teams that got good dual lineups, and let's run this. And then the next day they go to Bob Smith and whatever. And so us and Mays, we're the first to say, yep, we're in. Mill Valley, Manhattan, they're going to Gardner Edgerton. So fortunately, they couldn't go. But Hoxie has their invitational tournament like the next day, and they're not going to go. So it's like, man, like we already dual Mays. But, we don't need to drive to Hayes to dual Mays again. And Mays doesn't want to drive to Hayes to dual Rosehill if we're already going to do it. I mean, they'll fight us. I mean, those guys, they'll fight anybody just like anybody else will. They're not scared. They're not running just like us. But we don't need to drive 3.5 hours to go duel each other. So it stinks. It happened, but I think Paola is a team that's worthy of it. If they can make it on their schedule, I think Garden City's absolutely worthy. They're going to have a good lineup again. Maybe a little bit under the radar, but any of those guys, we'll do whoever. 3 years ago, when me and Chris got to Rosehill, that first COVID year, Derek Patterson hit us up and said, "Hey, Coach Shaw would like to invite you guys up to duel us in Derby." And we didn't bat an eye. We're like, "Yeah, we're in." We knew going into it that we were probably going to lose. We knew we were going to lose, okay? But we knew we could win some matches. And by the end of it, after dual Mays, we didn't win as many matches as we thought. We kind of had a rough day at the office. But for us, it was a good vector check to see where we're at. Well, we didn't end up dueling Derby. Derby didn't duel us, which we're a little frustrated by. Like, well, why not? We live 8 miles apart. This could be like the Dodge City Garden City duel. This could be an epic duel series of towns that are nearby, but they won't duel us. So, but then later that year, Andy Albright down at Chanute invited us down there to duel those guys. Well, Chanute won the 4A title that year. Andy had an awesome team. And we dueled them, Veneta, Oklahoma, and once again, Coach Samfright knew that we're probably not going to win. I knew that we weren't going to win, but we didn't care. It was about the opportunity to see where you're at. And I wish more schools would live by that mantra. Like you want to wrestle the best anytime, anywhere, any place. That's what the fans want. If we want to grow the sport, that's what people want to see. And I'll be honest with you, I'd like to see more duels set up like that. And let's get out of these league duels and just do a league tournament to free us up for some other marquee duels.
Right.
Because if you duel, I mean, like what you guys used to do at Dodge, the duels that I saw that you guys would film in Dodge City, that's the environment that every school should desire to have. Pack that place. You guys did free burritos one time, or I think that's what, or tacos or something.
Yep.
And that brought your section. It was awesome. And so I think building environments like that will draw the crowd. If you draw the crowd, you're going to grow the sport.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I would like to see, at some point us getting a dual state, like Oklahoma has, but that's a conversation for another episode. We'll wrap this one up. James, I appreciate you guys coming on. Guys, thanks for listening. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe. Let's keep this thing rolling. We've been doing good at views, but we got to start pumping out some more subs, and we'll keep going. James, I appreciate you coming on. Thanks, man.
Hey, Clay, I appreciate you and Keller doing this for me tonight. And shout out to all my coaches, guys like Connor Pinka, Kazan Earhart, Zach Gensler, Aaron Hogue, Jason McComb, Chris Seyfried, Jared Page, all those dudes, all the Punisher kids, and the state of Kansas as a whole. Proud of all you guys.
Appreciate you guys. Thanks for coming on. Just be the evolution of the sport. I mean, every now and again, you get these coaches that roll through that you just want to go, gosh, just get with the time, guy. If your coach is teaching your 6-year-old a headlock before anything, there's a problem. Look, we're going to take the 1 or the 16. You decide. Welcome to the show.